Russia and China kicked off chilling war games in the Sea of Japan in a show of force, just a day after Donald Trump's blistering nuclear warning. The US Commander-in-Chief ordered that 2 nuclear submarines be positioned near Russia before warning America is totally prepared for a nuclear war.
Well, you just have to read what he said. He was talking about nuclear. When you talk about nuclear, we have to be prepared, and we're totally prepared.
The extraordinary escalation by Trump followed a slew of inflammatory threats against America from Kremlin comrade Dmitry Medvedev. Just one day after, China and Russia began joint naval drills as they look to reinforce their partnership and counter what they see as a US-led global order. Dubbed Joint Sea 2025, the exercises, although pre-planned, began in waters near the Russian port of Vladivostok and would last for 3 days. Is this a true strategic alliance or a marriage of convenience? We spoke to a former NATO commander to find out what the drills mean.
We're certainly in a Cold War. Also, a lot of people are saying we're in a pre-war phase, particularly in Europe with what's happening there. I think the bottom line is still that America has overriding military power. And without wanting to sound glib, those who know. I think the Chinese know that and the Russians know that. And if President Trump does want to flex his military muscles, then he is probably the only person on the planet who can make things happen. So I think it is so important that there are cool heads around, because mistakes, misunderstandings and miscalculations can sometimes turn a Cold War into a hot war, and nobody wants that. So one is hoping that an awful lot is going on under the surface politically and diplomatically that is not being publicised to ensure that these miscalculations, misunderstandings and accidents do not happen and do not lead us into a hot war. The Russians are completely committed in Ukraine. I believe their army is culminating. In other words, it's running out of steam. When it comes to naval operations, of course, the Ukrainians have obliterated the Black Sea Fleet. Now, the Russian Navy has a number of other fleets, and we're seeing its Far Eastern Fleet now out and about. But I think the quality of the Russian military has really waned in the last few years. I understand a lot of their ships are pretty ancient, pretty sort of last generation technology, although they are building new ones. But the focus of Russia's military has very much been on Ukraine. It's been about building up the army. It's about building drones and missiles. So I don't think they have a lot of money to build new ships. And what they've got have been proved. If the Black Sea Fleet is anything to go by, it looks a lot better than it actually is. Because with now Trump appearing to properly saber rattle, and it would appear that Putin still really has no interest in peace. But if he doesn't come to the negotiation table with Trump this week, it could get very serious for Russia. We're not expecting the Americans to attack the Russians in any way, but some of the sanctions and tariffs that are going to be imposed, and a lot of those are focused at China. And I go back to my point that the Chinese love of a growing economy is probably more than its love of Russia. And if America does put these secondary sanctions on China because of its dealings with Russia, we might see a slightly different attitude coming out of Beijing. We know that they are practicing anti-missile defense. And that is something that has become key out of the war in Ukraine. Submarines and ships firing cruise missiles and other missiles have had a significant impact. So no doubt they would anticipate any conflict, that this is going to be a capability that is really important. So we know that they are practicing that. We know also that they're doing a lot of submarine drills as well. And again, although submarines have not really been a part of the war in Ukraine, since the end of the Second World War, submarine warfare has been absolutely key. And the Russians and the Americans and ourselves, that is the key part of our strategic nuclear deterrence. So there no doubt is something there. Now, China, when we're on the nuclear issue, China is the country that is making the most nuclear warheads at the moment, and growing faster than anybody else. So no doubt the Chinese will want to learn off the Russians, and they're always pretty crows and these sort of things. When it comes on to offensive naval operations, amphibious operations, It is unclear quite what they are doing there. But no doubt the Chinese have half an eye to Taiwan. And we know that if they do attack Taiwan, they will have to do considerable amphibious operations, which is why last week, not by coincidence, the Americans announced a new missile that they were developing that could actually destroy ships like the ones that we're seeing out in the South China Seas and Pacific at the moment, in great numbers, and that would be unable to be stopped by Chinese and Russian air defense. I don't think that was an accident that the Americans announced that last week. So again, I think this is more saber rattling. The activity is more for the benefit of probably the White House and NATO leaders than actually practice what we call tactical and low-level skills between the two navies. But I think it is sending a message that this is a significant military partnership that the Russians and the Chinese are developing, and the US and NATO and Western countries who oppose these two countries need to be aware that they're upping their game. I think these things are always tense, and that's what they're meant to be. I mean, that's China and Russia are doing this really to try and show to the Americans in particular that they're not going to be pushed around. Conversely, of course, the Americans or particularly Trump, is trying to do the best that he can in his mind to create peace. But these things are very finely balanced, and sometimes the dividing line between peace and war become pretty opaque. So when these things are happening, there's always chance for accidents. We don't remember back to a few months ago when a Russian commercial ship crashed into an American ship carrying US Air Force aviation fuel in the North Sea, which again, was probably an accident, but again could have created more because of the tensions around at the moment. So I think when tension is high, the propensity or the chances for things to escalate, are also very high, which is why it's very important that leaders are focus on what is really important. And certainly for this country and Europe, what is really important is peace in Ukraine. So let us hope that some of the gesticulation, if you like, particularly out of the White House, will lead to that. But at the same time, we've got the Russians and the Japanese and the Chinese exercising a considerable naval force in the Far East, which is not helping with global stability at the moment, I would suggest.